right, so today we are going to be taking a deep dive into the story of Theodore Roe.
Theodore Roe.
Now, you might not immediately recognize the name, but stick with us because this is a fascinating story.
Yeah.
This is a man who ran a multi-million-dollar gambling empire in 1940s Chicago.
Wow.
But he also had this reputation as like a modern-day Robin Hood figure.
It's true. It's a very strange, a fascinating paradox.
Yeah.
He was a gangster who was both feared and respected, a criminal who was also known for his philanthropy.
Right. And so we're going to try to kind of unpack all of that
We will.
in today's deep dive. And we're going to be using excerpts from Roe's Wikipedia page
That's right.
to learn about this guy.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that makes his story so interesting is that it really kind of flips the script on that typical gangster narrative.
Totally.
You know, we think about gangsters, we think about guys who, came from privilege.
Right.
Had connections, they kind of, were born on third base.
Right.
Roe was not like that at all.
Not at all, this guy. Was born to sharecroppers. He had no formal education and actually started his working life as a tailor.
That's right, as a tailor.
So how does a tailor become a kingpin in one of the most,
Yeah, how does that happen?
notorious cities in America?
Well, so Roe's journey is really remarkable. He goes from the cotton fields of the South to the bustling streets of Detroit, and he ends up in Chicago on the South Side.
Okay.
And it was in Chicago that he encountered the world of policy.
Okay.
Now, policy was an illegal lottery that was incredibly popular, particularly in the Black community.
Okay, now why was policy so popular?
Well, you have to remember the historical context, for a lot of Black Americans during this time period.
Yeah.
Legitimate opportunities for economic advancement were really limited due to segregation and discrimination.
Yeah.
So policy offered a chance to win big, a kind of a glimmer of hope.
Right.
In a system that often felt very rigged against them.
So Roe sees an opportunity here.
He does.
Right. He sees this underground economy that's thriving, and he figures out a way to tap into it.
That's right. He learns the ropes, working for another policy kingpin named Edward Jones.
Edward Jones, okay.
And together they built this massive network that by some estimates was bringing in $25 million annually by 1946.
Wow.
That's a lot of money.
That's a ton of money, especially back then.
Huge fortune, especially back then.
Yeah.
But that kind of success, it attracts attention.
It attracts the wrong kind of attention, right?
It attracts the wrong kind of attention. And in this case, it attracted the attention of the Chicago outfit.
Uh-oh.
The infamous organized crime syndicate that basically controlled the city.
Right.
Sam Giancana, who was a rising force in the outfit at the time.
Okay.
He sees Roe's operation as a potential gold mine.
Right.
And he decides he wants in.
Yeah, I don't think he sent a polite invitation
Oh, no.
to a business meeting or something.
The outfit did not
Yeah.
use those kinds of methods. They were much more brutal. In fact, they kidnapped Roe's partner, Ed Jones.
Oh, wow.
And they demanded a ransom for his release plus control of their entire gambling network.
Wow. So what does Roe do in this situation?
Well, most people, under that kind of pressure, they would cave.
Right.
They would just give in.
You would think.
But not Roe.
Yeah.
Roe was not like most people. He was a man of incredible resolve.
Really?
He paid the ransom to get Jones back safe.
Okay.
But he refused to give up his business.
Wow.
He just flat out refused.
That's incredibly brave, but also incredibly risky.
It was incredibly risky. It was a dangerous gamble.
He's basically declaring war on the Chicago outfit at this point.
He's telling them that he's not going to be intimidated.
Wow.
He's going to stand his ground. And that really sets the stage for this clash of wills that unfolds in the rest of his life.
So that kind of defines that refusal to back down.
Right.
That seems really central to Roe's story.
It is this act of defiance that I think begins to build this legend around him. And it all kind of culminates in this fateful encounter that we're going to talk about next, which is the killing of Fat Lenny.
All right, well, let's get into that then.
Let's do it.
Okay, so we're talking about a guy who built a criminal empire basically from scratch, and then stood up to the, most powerful criminal organization in the city.
Yeah, he was fearless.
So that takes a lot of guts. But, we've also been talking about this other side of Roe, this Robin Hood persona.
Right.
How did that develop alongside, a life of crime?
Well, it's really important to remember that figures like Roe, they weren't operating in a vacuum.
Right.
They were part of this complex social ecosystem.
Yeah.
And they were criminals, yes.
Right.
But they also filled a void that was left by, by mainstream institutions that often failed to serve the Black community.
So you're talking about things like access to loans or jobs.
Yeah.
Or just like a basic sense of fairness and protection.
Exactly. During that era, segregation and discrimination were rampant.
Right.
And it really limited opportunities for Black Americans, in almost every aspect of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so these kind of alternative systems of power emerged.
Yeah.
And figures like Roe, despite their, involvement in illegal activities,
Right.
became very influential in their communities.
So in a way, they were providing a service. They were meeting needs.
Yeah, they were providing a service
that
weren't being met by the legitimate institutions.
Right. And so that's where this whole, Robin Hood image comes from.
That's exactly where it comes from.
Yeah.
Roe wasn't just running a gambling operation.
Yeah.
He was also known for his generosity, for his willingness to help people in his community who were struggling.
Yeah. And we were talking about, the transcript mentions him paying for people's hospital bills.
Yeah.
Or covering funeral expenses. Even confronting, other gangsters.
Right.
To make sure that people got their winnings.
He had his own code of ethics.
Right. It's like he had a moral code.
He did. He had a moral code, even within this very, kind of amoral world.
Right. So it makes you wonder, what were his motivations for this philanthropy?
Right.
Was it just that he was a genuinely good guy?
Yeah. Was it purely altruistic, or was there something else going on?
Was it a way to kind of, maintain power and influence in the community?
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination of factors.
Yeah.
There are countless stories about Roe's genuine acts of kindness, just helping people in need without expecting anything in return.
Right.
But it's also true that his generosity, it really helped to solidify his standing within the community.
Yeah.
It reinforced his authority. It ensured loyalty.
Right. So it's a complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated. It's not a simple equation.
Right. Right. It's a mixture of, self-interest and genuine concern for his community.
Yeah.
But it's clear that whatever the motivation was, his actions resonated with people.
They did.
And they saw him as someone who understood their struggles.
Right.
Someone who was willing to fight for them.
Yeah.
Even if it meant going up against the most powerful forces in the city.
And again, that goes back to that theme of defiance.
Right.
He was willing to challenge the status quo.
Yeah, and we were talking about how, he refused to back down from the Chicago outfit.
Mm-hmm.
But, his defiance wasn't just limited to organized crime.
That's right.
He also challenged the racial inequalities of the time.
Yeah.
Right? He used his wealth and his influence to try and create opportunities for Black Americans who were, being shut out of the mainstream economy.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
Because, Roe's story is, you can't separate it from the larger struggle for civil rights and economic justice.
Yeah.
He was a product of his time.
Right.
But he also helped to shape that time.
Yeah.
He was pushing back against these limitations that were imposed by a system that was designed to keep Black Americans in a subordinate position.
Yeah, and so it's in that context,
right,
that historical context,
exactly,
that we can begin to understand how this guy who was running a gambling empire could also be seen as a hero.
Right.
By so many in his community. His
story really challenges our, these neat categories that we like to put people in.
Right, good and evil.
Right, good and evil.
Yeah.
In a hero-villain.
Yeah.
It's much more complicated than that.
Right, so he was both a product of his environment.
Yeah.
And a disruptor of that environment.
Exactly.
That's a really interesting contradiction.
It is, and it's that contradiction, the tension between these criminal activities and his role as a community leader that makes his story so fascinating.
Yeah, well, it's certainly been a fascinating deep dive so far.
It has.
But, unfortunately, the story doesn't have a happy ending.
No, it doesn't.
Roe's defiance of the outfit ultimately had consequences.
It did.
What happened after the killing of Fayette Lenny? Okay, so when we left off, we were talking about Roe and his, continued defiance of the Chicago outfit.
Right.
He paid that ransom for his partner, but refused to hand over his business.
Yeah.
And of course, there's the killing of Fat Lenny Caifano.
Right, a made man.
Which really upped the stakes.
It did. It changed everything.
So what were the repercussions of all of that?
Well, Giancana immediately responded with this wave of just terror aimed at black bookmakers all across Chicago. It was a campaign of extortion and violence, and a lot of them ended up just, fleeing the city.
Wow. So this is a very deliberate attempt then to just crush the competition.
Oh, yeah.
And send a message,
Absolutely.
about who's in control.
There was no question who was in control after this.
Right. So how does Roe respond to this?
Well, Roe refused to be intimidated.
Well, wow.
Even with the constant threat to his life. He stayed in Chicago. Wow.
And he just, carried on with his business.
That's incredible.
He just would not back down.
But he was also diagnosed with stomach cancer around this time, right?
Yeah, he was.
So, talk about pressure from all sides.
This was a period of just immense stress for Roe.
Yeah.
He's dealing with this life-threatening illness.
Right.
But at the same time, he's trying to, to outmaneuver the Chicago outfit.
Right.
It was a fight he couldn't win.
So how did it all end?
Well, in August of 1952,
Okay.
Roe was shot and killed.
Oh, wow.
On the steps of his own home.
Wow.
The assailants were never caught.
Okay.
But most people assume it was a hit.
By the outfit.
By the outfit.
Yeah, it's a tragic and violent end to a life that was already so full of drama and contradiction.
It is.
But his funeral was reportedly the second largest ever held for an African American in Chicago.
Yeah, it was massive.
Second only to the funeral of Jack Johnson.
Yeah, thousands of people lined the streets.
Wow.
To pay their respects. And that says a lot, about the impact that he had on his community.
It does.
Yeah.
He was a criminal, yes, but he was also a provider.
Right.
A protector. A symbol of hope.
And it's interesting that, even Giancana,
yeah,
the head of the outfit, seems to have had some grudging respect for Roe.
He did.
There's that famous quote,
yeah,
where he was caught on an FBI wiretap saying, "Black or no black, that bastard went out like a man."
Yeah.
He had balls.
Yeah, it's an amazing quote.
That's kind of an incredible statement.
It is.
For a guy like Giancana to make.
Yeah, you can tell there was a certain level of admiration there, even, amongst his enemies.
Yeah, so, how do we reconcile all these, seemingly contradictory parts of Roe's life? The violence, the generosity, the defiance, this criminal enterprise.
Yeah.
But also this, community leadership.
I don't think there's an easy answer to that question. I think Roe's story is a powerful reminder that, history is rarely black and white. Human beings are complex.
Yeah.
We're capable of great things and terrible things.
Right.
And sometimes those things exist within the same person.
Right. And I think if there's one thing that I'm taking away from this deep dive, is that Theodore Roe's story really is a powerful reminder that we should never settle for these simplistic narratives.
Right.
Or these easy answers.
Agreed.
The past is full of nuance and contradiction and complexity.
Absolutely.
And it's in those messy, complicated spaces that we often find the most compelling stories.
That's where the good stuff is.
So to all of our listeners out there, I encourage you to keep exploring Roe's world.
Yeah. Learn more about it.
Delve deeper into the world of policy kings, their impact on Chicago's history. And, think about the larger questions their stories raise.
Yeah.
About race power and the American dream.
Great questions, yeah.
Who knows what fascinating insights you might uncover.
Happy digging, everyone.